Welcome to our show. We appreciate who you are. We appreciate all the positive compliments we get for what we are doing, and we are growing and growing here. Paul Wellstone said we all do better when we all do better, and that is the focus of our show here at Barbershop Talk. Just to get you in the know, you should already know, but let's remind you, we have our first annual Barbershop Talk and Barbershop Social Services calendar, leadership calendar. There are two focuses of that calendar. One is to fundraise. We wanted to be a part of making our community better, other than doing our show and the various things that we do, and make sure that we are donating to local organizations as they make a difference with our clientele and with our community. So the proceeds from this calendar that will go to Seeds of Wisdom Academy. It's a Black-owned and operated academy and daycare here in the community. It's been making a difference in lives for the longest, and we want to definitely support that entity as it's doing great things in our community. And then also the proceeds go to what we are doing here at Barbershop and Social Services and Barbershop Talk South Minnesota. We are going, we are growing, we are grassroots, but as you know, as we grow, we need to add different cameras and different things, so we need to begin to fundraise and do different things to make us bigger and better for what we do. So please make sure you buy a calendar, and again, it goes to two great causes, and it will make a difference in our community. The second thing I wanted to make sure you know about this community, this calendar, is we wanted to make sure that we have positive imagery about our African American people and minorities in our community. Often, as the media does, and it is what it is, we're not blaming the media, we often don't see positive images of who we are as Black people, as minorities, and as voiceless folks. So that is the focus of this calendar as well. So make sure you buy one, and we are asking you to buy one. All 450 or so people that have liked us as we continue to grow, we want all 450 of you to buy a calendar, as this money will go to a good cause. So please jump in.
At Greenhouse Graphics, we offer award-winning design services at affordable rates to help your business attract customers and ultimately affect your bottom line. Working with you one-on-one at whatever stage you're at in developing your brand. I want to help drive success to your business with excellent design and quality marketing materials. From startup companies in need of custom graphics, websites, logos, to seasonal maintenance, I got you covered. I take time and listen and care about your needs. I understand that image and quality mean everything in business when it comes to leaving a lasting impression on your clients and customers that lasts a lifetime. With nearly 2 decades of experience, it is in my DNA to create eye-popping graphics for your business. Greenhouse Graphics, making sure you always look your best.
All right, welcome to Barbershop Talk. Indeed, it is Wednesday. Is that right? Wednesday. 1/29/20. And if you're doing a double take right now, looking to my left, it's not a double take. This is the governor of Minnesota. So welcome to Barbershop Talk. We'll be getting into it with our governor here pretty soon. But thank you for coming. Thank you for all your aides coming as well.
Nima and all that. We really are
Glad
thankful.
to be here. I have to tell you, I feel a little self-conscious in a barbershop every time I come.
Yeah.
You can just join me. You can join me. You can join me.
We'll have to hook you up with a technology today.
Yeah, we'll get you a good
We're so
one.
thankful for
Yeah,
that
glad
you're
to be
here.
here.
We'll get into some questions with you in a little bit.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know, particularly because this is probably some people that have not seen us. This is Barbershop Talk, South Minnesota. We are a grassroots online show, and we started the brain trust right there, Mr. Andre Crockett. He's the man that started this, and we had this idea of having the barbershop as a foundation to speak to issues of diversity, inclusivity, and specifically for our at-risk folks and issues around disparities and making a difference. And we launched it 2018 when we had those elections, getting the politicians out. Bud was here as well, and we thought, wow, why don't we roll over and continue to do this? So this is a creation of Andre Crockett. We jumped on, and that's why we're here today. We use Paul Wellstone's old quote, when we all do better, we all do better.
Right.
And that's the concept we have here. We are for the African American, the at-risk, the minority, the voiceless, but mostly all of us, because again, when we all do better, when we all do better. So that's what this show is about. We also are about positive imagery of minorities and black folks. Typically, it is what it is. We don't see many great images of our black folk or minorities. And so that's another thing we are about, positive imagery. So while I say that, let me promote, again, our calendar is out. This is a leadership calendar of our area. This is another idea that grew out of this. These are 12 local leaders, minority leaders in the community. And this is a fundraising calendar for us here at Barbershop and Social Services, Barbershop Talk, and also for Seeds of Wisdom Academy, a black-owned and operated school and daycare right here. So please get your calendar. They're $20 if you get them in person, $25 if you get them over PayPal. But again, this is a fundraising calendar. We wanted to do this to not only, obviously we do what we do in this grassroots media, but we wanted to reach out to our community and show that we're about our community as well. And secondarily, we wanted to promote the positive imagery of minorities and folks in this community that are making a difference. And so make sure you buy this. This goes to a good cause. We're growing here at Barbershop Talk. We need to add cameras in and all that. You only get so long to be grassroots, so we're trying to go next level. And we need all 400 plus of you to buy a calendar as we seek to add cameras and this, that, and the other. So please help us there. So
Also, like us on Facebook.
like us on Facebook.
Subscribe
That is
us
right.
on YouTube. So
Yes, you gotta like us. It's one thing to look at us.
that's right.
It's another thing to hit that social media
right.
like
Yes,
and
yes.
show us that you love what we do. So again, welcome to Barbershop Talk. As we do, we have a Keep It 100 segment, Governor, where we try to do it like the real barbershop, kind of debate over some issues and get real over some issues. So
right.
you're in the hot seat right now,
All right.
Governor. I know you do a lot of work, so you don't have to chime in, but you can.
All right.
These are all Super Bowl related, and audience, you can jump in as well. But
Nice.
you know what? Before I do, I need to note our dignitaries that are here today. We have Chief Jim Franklin here, Captain Stowell from Rochester Police Department. We have the president of the Rochester NAACP, W.C. Jordan, the VP of the Rochester NAACP, Wale Elegbedi here. We have Nima here. The governor has all his folks. We have citizens here. I know I'm missing names, but we are thankful for all of y'all coming here today. We don't typically have an audience because we know our folks are usually busy and they can't come out, so we just hit them up online. So, but we're thankful for everyone that is here today. We appreciate that. So, the Keep It 100 segment,
All right.
and we'll go easy.
All right.
The first one is, what is the best Super Bowl food? Ooh, stumped already. I already got mine in my mind. I already know.
Me too. I'm a chili guy.
Chili?
I do
Okay,
chili,
that's
usually
good.
ready at halftime, and so chili with all the fixings.
You got to go with the good old fashioned hot dog.
Hot dog?
Hot
Ooh,
dogs.
Chicago.
Tradition.
Okay, I got that.
Speaking of Chicago,
Chicken wing, there we go. See,
I
he's
like
got
that
it.
time. I like that time. I'm digging that time. I'm digging it.
Bears tie.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I'm digging it. I saw it. I saw
I'm
it.
going with
That's
hot
a man
wings.
with taste.
Got to roll with the hot wings.
Hot
wings is
Yeah,
a-
how hot?
Really hot. Now that I'm getting
Really?
older, I hear that the spicy stuff is good for old people like me. So that's what I'm doing now. Okay, it's getting tougher as we go here. The best halftime show. Already got mine in my head.
Oh yeah.
Ooh,
We got to almost be unanimous on this, don't we?
probably.
Our very own Prince.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yes.
Yeah,
You gotta go with Prince.
Oh wow, unanimous.
Yeah.
To me, I mean, am I right in remembering? It started raining when he began to sing Purple
Yes.
Rain. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, hey, audience, if you have any disagreements, let us know. We're here to chop it up at the barbershop and get it right. So if Prince is not the one.
But on that one, you're wrong. If you say that-
Yeah.
That's the only one,
The
right?
others, you have your own opinion. That's
Yeah,
one.
I would go
Agree with you
honorable
on that.
mention U2. I don't know why. I love that Super Bowl. That was a while ago. But we won't go
Yeah, that
too
was
deep
good.
in that. So, all right, the last one and tough for all of us here today. And I know, Governor, this one, a lot of folks are going to be like, wow,
I know.
depending on what you say. Who is going to win the Super Bowl?
I'm going with Kansas City and Mahomes. I think he just got it. I like what we see. I coached long enough to know to watch that team.
Did you
They fell
coach
behind.
football?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you
You
know
want
the
me to
game.
tell you about the state championship? If you got, I could use the whole hour.
Oh, you gotta, please do.
Yeah, 99.
Well, now you're qualifying what you're saying, so go ahead.
99, but that, also that year, we lost to Rochester John Marshall, but, won the state championship. In fact, I think we lost to Mayo too that same year, but, went and ran 10 off. But, I see a team that gets behind, comes back like that.
That is true. They came back, what, 50
What do you
something
think?
points? Now that you said you're a former football coach, I'm going to give you some credit there. I might disagree, gentlemen.
I'm going with KC, man.
Yeah,
KC.
I'm going there too.
I like to see Mahomes. He deserved it. He worked hard for it. I like to see him get it.
Audience, anybody?
For 49ers, you know.
49ers?
After
Really?
after the whooping for the Packers and Vikings.
Okay, then while they said that, and need I say, gentlemen, there have been many Super Bowls where the offense has been spectacular, but the defense was
Yeah.
just as spectacular. Defense wins championship.
Yeah.
Offense is just flashy. That's just my take on it.
So who you got?
I got the 49ers. I don't want to have the 49ers, but I do have them. So
I
I'm
don't
a
know what that
little
means, but okay.
discombobulated
I think
here.
in 15 years, I think Mahomes is in that conversation with among the best.
Yeah,
I think.
that was the
I hope
conversation this
Mahomes
morning.
stays healthy,
I think so. When he's
Yeah.
throwing passes behind his back or
Oh,
whatever he does.
I wish my Bears would have drafted him, but
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they had a
Controversy.
chance.
yeah,
Oh, they're
a little
feeling
bit,
that.
just a little bit.
Mm-mm.
But
Well,
I'm still with him.
Yeah, they can trade your boy and they can pick up Brady. Boom. He might be shocking. Free agent.
He's going to San Diego.
Yeah.
Is he
That's what
going?
they're saying.
Is he going?
I think so.
Yeah, he wants to prove that he's the
I
man without
ain't been keeping
Belichick.
up. I ain't
No?
been keeping up.
You should call him up and say, bro, Bears, this is where it's at. All right, we want to get into our show. We got a lot of folks here. Governor, thank you for
Yep.
being here. His
Thank you.
resume is complete. Former teacher, former U.S. congressman, former military, on and on, family man, a husband, the whole nine, and he happened to be the governor. So this is who we have here today, and we're very thankful that you have opened up your busy schedule,
be here.
and all those that support you to be here today and go through some questions with us, and also just welcome you to our show. Our show is really not about controversy or whatever. We get into the debate, keep it 100, but it is about welcoming
That's
folks
great.
like you to our community, because you
Important
already do a
conversation.
lot
Yes.
for our community, having good conversation on our community. So we're very thankful that you're here today. We'll throw you an easy one at first. Governor, why did you get in politics? You've been doing this for 20 plus years, maybe?
About 15, you know,
15?
I never imagined this. I was teaching school and, you know, I had little ones at home and, never imagined myself. I never ran for anything. You know, I voted and I kept engaged, but I was certainly by no means active. And I think probably for me it was, I got deployed with my Guard unit for a time and I was pretty frustrated. And I think it was centered around, maybe foreign policy to begin with, but it seemed to me, and I think this is maybe your listeners and viewers think this too. I never really knew who these people were who did this stuff. Like they knew somebody or whatever. And so, kind of got involved. A group of folks said, well, maybe you should run for Congress. I'm glad I had no clue what that meant because I probably wouldn't have done it had I did.
Right, absolutely.
But I didn't know anybody other than I taught their kids, which was actually more than just nothing. Because I had a lot of people say, I didn't really know your politics, but I know you cared for my kids. You did a good job. So, won that congressional seat. And won it 5 more times, had the privilege of serving southern Minnesota, and then just started looking around, and I think we're seeing it today. Unfortunately, I think the situation in DC we all saw it coming, and it's frustrating. I believe Minnesota was a little different. I believe that these issues could be solved, that the issues people cared about from healthcare, jobs, equity, inclusion, things that meant something in people's lives, they really wanted to see progress on. And And so I asked my neighbors to give me a shot at it.
Mhm.
So I certainly never planned this. I
Mhm.
recognize that I am a short-term caretaker
Mhm.
of trying to bring my skills to bring folks together, and change the tone. And I think in Minnesota we have to a certain degree. That
Right.
doesn't mean you can't strongly disagree,
Mhm.
but it also means you need to recognize when these issues are real,
Mhm.
leaders need to step up and do something about
Absolutely.
it, not just talk about
Right.
it. And so that's what I've tried to do. And I'm proud of things. I know where we failed and we can do more, but I think in Minnesota,
Mhm.
for me, just validated this to me, people do care. They
Mhm.
want to focus on
Absolutely.
their community,
Absolutely.
so.
So national campaign after you're done here? I mean,
Well, I don't think that, but
Okay.
You didn't think this either, though, so it's a possibility.
I'm certainly gratified to do this, and this is, it's one of the most humbling things, but it's also, I'm telling you right now, I think the states as the laboratories of democracy,
Mhm.
it's the
Absolutely.
states and the communities are gonna make a difference. I mean, I think you see it, what you're doing here is truly talking about building community, talking about those voices. And I think maybe for the first time in a long time, people do recognize that it matters.
It
You know,
does,
that-
it does.
I worry that people say, well, what difference does it make if I vote, or if I listen to this, or I go
Mhm.
get in?
Yeah.
Now they know, you know what, it
Mhm.
does matter.
Yeah.
They're seeing folks rise up out of, just out of communities
Mhm.
and lead.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, before we get to our next question, I want to let the audience know online, you can send in questions to Bud's Facebook, and he'll get that. We have that going. And we also have Nikki Niles that just came in, leader from the probation department,
Yeah.
Governor, right there. So we wanted to acknowledge Nikki Niles is in the house.
Yes,
So
yeah.
we wanted to say hello to her. All right, Governor, you recently unveiled a bonding proposal. I understand you prioritize equity while determining which project to fund. What was that all about?
yeah, we're so many things in state government, and the thing is about equity and inclusion, and it's not, equity, yay, like we did it. It's about what does that actually mean? And what we've known is that the statistics are pretty horrific. The barriers for folks, whether it's home ownership, whether it's small businesses, how to start or whatever, are pronounced between white communities and communities of color. And the bonding bill's a way to keep up our capital investments, ways that we build roads, we build water infrastructure and all that, to finally start putting all of that through the lens of equity. What I mean by that is that how are we gonna talk about transit projects? The greatest example of tragic when we don't think of equity when we do bonding is Interstate 94 through the Rondo neighborhood.
Oh, that's
We just
huge,
cut it in
huge,
half,
huge. Yeah, yeah.
destroyed the culture, put it on,
Yeah, absolutely.
because nobody thought to ask the community, what would this look like?
Right,
How would
absolutely,
this
right.
be? So it goes beyond definitely making sure that there's money in there for communities and community projects in communities of color. So, you're making sure. So it's not just about, yes, we need to make sure that there's money in these communities, but every project we do, are we looking through who's able to contract on the project? What is the
Absolutely.
impact going to be? And how do we make sure that, because again, if we don't get this equity piece right,
Right.
this
right.
isn't just in the communities of color that are impacted, it's
Right.
the entire state.
Yes.
Because we're missing out on opportunity. So that's what that was about. The
Amazing.
equity, if you submitted a project, part of the rubric was, where did it impact communities of color? Where was the equity piece in this, and how did you think about that? So we weren't building, if we were gonna build a new school, what were you thinking about the community?
Right,
who was
absolutely,
there?
absolutely.
And it happens in a lot of communities do think about this, but sometimes that afterthought of equity causes incredible, I mean, we've got generational trauma.
Oh, absolutely.
By 94 in Rondo.
Oh, absolutely. People
And-
still talk
and
about
where
that.
schools were built,
Yes.
where children had to not go to the school that should have been in their neighborhood,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and on that, obviously we have DMC in Rochester, and
Yes.
WC has done a lot of work in trying to get the equity around that. I don't know if we're gonna jump in there, WC. How has that impacted, or is it kind of retro as it relates to DMC? What you were saying, is that flowing into?
Yeah,
how
no, I
DMC
think, and this is why, and thanking the folks who are involved in this, this is a real concern, and it's not just, gentrification, it's who's being left out, who's being brought
Right.
in on this, and how are we thinking about it? We know one of the issues here is that we're seeing, and it's not directly, DMC alone, but housing prices.
Oh, absolutely.
There's an equity piece, and so we've got this major economic project that's going.
Yeah.
What are the unintended consequences of that? And as I think everybody in the room knows, far too often those unintended consequences fall on communities of color.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're the afterthoughts that they're there. And then it's viewed as, well, it's too bad that happened. Just to be clear, property values, economic opportunity, achievement, all were thrown out of whack by the 94 project in Rondo.
Right.
So there's children today and families that are still feeling the economics and cultural effect of that. I think what they're doing here in Rochester is thinking, and what we're trying to do in bonding is, there is no excuse for not being on the front end of thinking about this. There is no place to not be thinking about this. So if we're gonna make a major investment here, making sure the community's heard.
Right.
And I think that has to be on the front end. And these are tough questions.
Right.
They're gonna cause some consternation in communities, but they should.
So our folks, they can be confident that as DMC continues to evolve and become this great city on the shining hill, that these things are happening with it.
Well, one thing I would say is don't ever be comfortable. And I don't know if confident is a position. I think what they can be assured of is it's being, at least it's in the conversation. But I worry. And it is, I think you've seen this. It's sometimes not out of malice, it's just out of ignorance.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And I think the fear I have is that there will be more of a sense of complacency and not take that into consideration, because this takes a whole nother level of thought. And what it does is you have to totally change the paradigm here. It's not people like me or my commissioners thinking about it, because we don't know.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
making sure the community is in the planning stages, so they're the ones that are telling that. So what I worry about is too much being pushed top down, where you're not hearing those voices in time to make a difference in it. And us saying, well, we're very enlightened. We're thinking about equity. We're doing all that.
Right.
And I truly believe many people are, and their goodness of their heart. But what we've learned is you got to get down to the street level and talk about the people who are there to do that. And I'm not sure, and I think this is because these are local decision making. Are we doing a good enough job of incorporating all those voices? That's my constant thing of making sure that our cabinet reflects what the state looks like.
Right.
Making sure judges. This is my goal right now, and I'm very proud of this, that women and minority
We're seeing that down here.
are seated on there. Because here's the thing, that's the worst day of your life, to go into a courtroom, and the last thing you want to see is someone in there who has no idea where you came from.
Absolutely.
No idea what happened to that, because then the idea of justice becomes two parallel tracks.
Right.
So I would not say, I would not use the word confidence or complacent on this. I would say be cautiously optimistic that we're moving in that direction, but see this as always a process you're gonna have to be involved. It's not as if we put this in place and it's done. It's gonna have to continue to be evaluated.
So folks need to go to the
Need to
DMC
go.
meetings, go to the Rochester
Yes.
City Board meetings, and say, make sure.
Yeah, and I don't think, and I think you should assume, history would tell you this, assume that we're probably not gonna get it right every time.
Right.
And that's not a negative, but just to say, I know that you're trying to do your best, but have you thought about what this is gonna do to property values in this community? Of what is the affordability price, so.
You established a council for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why are you proud of that? And just for being formerly on the council for Black African Americans.
Yeah.
I was on the council on Black Minnesotans, which is now the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage.
Right.
Formerly on that, how is that different from CLAC, that council, the Diversity Council?
Yeah, it's
Hispanic.
It's similar, and it's the same reason. I think what we're trying to do is, and the reason we did it through executive order and trying to, I think, sink the roots lower, is my concern is we see changes come, and they come as the political winds blow, which is good.
Right.
But we don't institutionalize those to be able to survive who's in the elected office. So I think for us, it's trying to figure out, it's not enough for me to appoint judges of color. What I wanted to do was the Judicial Selection Committee, who goes out and vets people and sends the finalists to me, that's where the power lies. That's where the fundamental change lies, of the people who are out there in communities saying, hey, you're a young lawyer. Have you thought about being on the bench to go out and find them? Because we have the best laid plans. If we don't know how to get into that community, and if that Judicial Selection Committee is not there as an authentic voice, it's going to be harder. So what you would end up seeing is I might be able to statistically show you that I've appointed judges of color, but when I'm gone, is there anything that's in place that's permanent that ensures that those quality candidates keep coming up by themselves? And so,
We got a question in the audience. Or
Well, it wasn't a question. It was just a kind of a comment on DMC. And I think that the governor's right. We do see different gaps in it as it progresses. And you have to see if those gaps are intentional or if it is ignorance. But I think that to your audience, people need to get involved in this issue. They need to come to the table. They need to hear from the community so that, you know, that they will know and have our input. When we look at some of the percentages for contracting that they have out there, I think the 4% is not enough to achieve the equity that we're looking for. And then there's another component where the makeup of that group needs to be examined too. So I just encourage people that are listening to get involved. If they don't have another conduit, they can come through the NAACP.
Absolutely.
But we need to approach this issue. It's a 20-year project that's already been started, so there's still time to get off to a rocket start.
good point. WC's been pushing this. The contracting is one aspect of it. I would like to make note, and I think it, like you said, on trying to figure out whether these are intentional or whether they're inadvertent, with the results being the same. But I do think it's important, if you're going to set history straight, to be clear about some of these things. I don't think we can just write off like the Highway 94 was just an unintentional act.
Right.
I think we knew what was going to happen in many cases, and I think we knew that this would be a community that wouldn't have the power to speak up, so we're going to run the highway through their community.
Right.
And so I think when people say, well, it's hard to navigate and the system's not working right for us, in some cases, the system was meant to not work for us.
Right.
On
Absolutely.
purpose. And so I think for us to not acknowledge that we run into the potential of just seeing these as just kind of, silly us missing this part of it, of staying very intentional about this. And I think the contracting piece of that is true, that we're setting goals, but then we're making it difficult for people to get there. The same thing happens for nonprofits who are out there to try and help. They don't have the capacity to have grant writers that allow them to write these good grants, even though we have a smaller nonprofit that is super effective, whether it's hiring or equity issues. They don't get the grant, and then we just say, well, their submission wasn't very good. That's because there's a historical bias against them because they did not have the capacity.
That's
So
right. That's right.
I think for all of us to take that into consideration, and having, in this case, the NAACP being there, we need to have that oversight. It's there.
Criminal justice reform is huge with Andre and what he's done with Sports Mentorship Academy, and also Buddy, that he runs a couple of programs. You recently pardoned the departed Max Mason, which I just learned of, who was convicted of a sexual assault in 1920. Why was that important to you, particularly for a gentleman that has died?
Yeah, and I want to take this broader issue of criminal justice reform, starting on the front ends, the inequities that were there, starting on banning the box and restoration of voting rights and training and all that. My wife is heading up one of these issues with communities, trying to partner together to figure out ways that we can make sure when we see criminal justice reform across an entire spectrum, it's about confronting the past inequities, talking about what mass incarceration did, understanding about how we're going to have to put the resources in necessary to make those cases. And one of them was this issue that is a stain on who we are as Minnesotans, but it's one that we just need to say this is part of who we were. On June 15th, 1920, 100 years ago coming up here, 6 black workers with a traveling circus were accused of raping a white woman.
Oh, this is akin to
Yes.
Duluth. Oh, I did not know that.
3 of them were lynched by a mob of 10,000 people. Max Mason was charged with this, was one of the ones who was not lynched but was charged. He was convicted. He applied for a pardon in 1924, denied. In 1925, he was paroled. The prosecuting attorney and the judge said he didn't do this, that we didn't do this. Well, Max Mason went on to live his life with a false conviction of rape on his record. And now there's a group of folks that are keeping this alive up in Rochester. They're gonna gather on June 15th with at least 10,000 Minnesotans to say, the murders of these 3 men was a stain and needs to be corrected. We put forward to do what hasn't been done. Our pardon boards, and I'd ask all your listeners to look at this, we need work to do there. We issued less pardons than the state of Mississippi in this. So for a state who sees themselves as progressive and moving forward, criminal justice reform has been held back.
Yes.
We don't incarcerate as many as others, but as we heard earlier, we have an awful lot of people on supervised probation, which we just changed the rules on this. We have people on probation for 30 years. I would challenge anybody in this room, myself included, that you would have a violation in 30 years. You would miss a curfew, you would do something.
Absolutely.
So we set a cap of 5 years to say you pay your time, you get back in there, ban the buck. What we're gonna try and do, we have never issued a posthumous pardon. There's not any goal that says it can't. Minnesota is very different than any other state, that I, as governor, do not have the authority to issue pardons alone. It is done with the Attorney General and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It has to be unanimous. I philosophically think the role of pardons was the idea of clemency of the governor, because as long as it's still in the courts are the ones that convicted them. So they have a vested interest in keeping him in, rather than me to be able to say, Max Mason was innocent, pardon this man. So we're gonna have this discussion coming up before June 15th. We have now put it on the docket and made the case that Max Mason should receive a pardon. For all your listeners who say, don't you have other things to do, Governor? Aren't you worried about the roads? Aren't you doing about all this? Correcting the historical record is a step that has to be taken, or we will never get this right. And so correcting it and saying Max Mason was wrongfully convicted, he deserves a pardon to clear his name. And by the way, we as Minnesotans don't need to look to Mississippi to know that there was a lynching. We did it right here. And that's not who we are today, but it is our past, and it is who we are. So I think that's where that's at.
These 2 gentlemen can speak better to this than myself. But working with the Public Defender Office, and given what Obama did with the Criminal Justice Reform and Trump is doing, and what you said, I think it's amazing that they're trying to stop the historic racism. Let's put it where it is as it relates to racism. However, this is my opinion. If we were to stop all the inappropriate practices up to 2020, we still have this historical trauma and generational trauma of individuals. We have to kind of tweak their frame of mind as it relates to crime and various issues around that. And to me, that's where I'm seeing the gap. Are we having therapy and various things helping folks get out of that historical trauma? Programs and such. And I've been watching, obviously, with the Public Defender Office, the DLC, and this is not, I'm not putting this on you, Governor. Do you have culturally competent programming to help a 20-year-old young man that has generations of telling him that crime is normality?
Not yet, we don't.
To change, and I think
that's right. Not yet, we don't. Do we need to get there? Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think this issue around, I think there have been those who put it well. These truth and reconciliation pieces before you can actually get to restorative justice have to happen. So you're absolutely right. Even if we start doing it right today, we've got generations that were caught in this. And I've had this conversation around cannabis reform, mainly because it had racial undertones. I'm not encouraging my teenagers to go smoke marijuana. That's not it at all. Prohibition doesn't work, and that was another case of this. There's an awful lot of suburban white kids that bought marijuana from someone who spent time in jail, and they went on to be elected in office, and it happens. And I think for us to see it across there, we're not there yet. We are not there yet. But I think in working with probation system, in working with what post-incarceration looks like, in working with college, not this feel-good thing. There's different ways that people can get training, but we're talking about real standards of folks who are coming in there and knowing when you come out of there that it's not just us doing a good deed or feeling good about we gave this, or even employing this person coming out, but to believe that there are authentic things that we can be taught in our society about folks who are incarcerated, and seeing that there's a value going through the wall and outside the wall.
Absolutely.
And I think the answer right now is no, we are not there yet, that we are continuing to try and push for that. I think the bold decision to cap probation at 5 years outside of those violent
That's a good
crimes
one, yeah.
is going to do something. I think we need to continue to push away for restoration of the vote, and we need to talk about it. When I talked about cannabis reform, to be clear, when we do this, one of the components that has to be with it is expungement of those records, so folks start fresh when they come out. Because that's the type of historical trauma.
Yeah.
You might let them out and get
Yes.
them going, but you all know you have to answer this question
Yeah.
on the form.
That's right.
Yes.
Because we got people that won't come and apply
Yeah.
because they know they have to do a background check.
Absolutely.
Not because they're dangerous or gonna do it again, but they're afraid that that's gonna kick them out. And then that creates all that internal trauma where they don't feel like they're worthy to be there to do it, when we know they are.
Yeah, yeah.
So no, in answer to your question, not enough. Do we believe that the commissioner's starting? Yes.
That's great.
This is
That's
gonna
good to hear.
be, this truth, reconciliation, and change around, and I agree with you on this. I don't find a lot of commonality with President Trump, but he moved the ball forward on this, and you need to give credit for that.
Right, right.
And there have been many conservatives that have viewed this, I think, both from the position of redemption, but also, I just gotta tell you, even selfishly, it is so expensive to lock people up.
It
Who could
is.
Be really good students,
Very.
real good
Yeah.
Very.
contributing members of
49,000
society.
a year,
Get them
somewhere
out.
around there. Yeah,
it's-
absolutely.
It's cheaper to send them to college.
That's right.
And if we get in that position, and I just throw this out for folks, if you can remove the moral responsibility of correcting these historical traumas, here's a fact in Minnesota. We are one of the only states in the upper Midwest that actually does have an influx of population, but all the upper Midwestern states are staying relatively flat. 70% of our workforce across this state in the next 20 years is coming from communities of color.
Wow.
We are going, if we allow the achievement gap in our schools to continue, we're gonna fail. If we do not figure out a way to quit incarcerating, especially black males, we are going to collapse financially. We're
Right.
going to lose all those opportunities. So for those who are wondering, be tough on crime and lock them up, whatever, this is coming home to roost with every single one of us.
Absolutely.
So,
That's
Remember to keep it real.
Yeah,
Yeah,
keep it
so,
real.
so I don't know if it come from your office or wherever, can executive order that the schools and them have a cultural competency program, right? Because you alluded to
Yeah.
that, I think the community's doing a great job, but look at everybody who's going to serving the community, right? Mayo's great and Olmsted great, but it's no one from our community that they partner with.
that's right.
And so there's a void where the outside it look real good and shiny,
Yep.
but our kids are saying this and neglecting to listen to the voice of our kids. Our kids said we want teachers of color and we want programs that we're familiar with to come inside outside schools and the schools to partner with, and that's not happening.
And read authors that come from our community.
That's right.
Right.
And it's not, and it's not happening.
It is not.
And it's not happening. And so, so how do we get the ball moving and saying that since we got the high achievement gap, we got, Minnesota's the second worst place to live. And our kids are saying, okay, will we see more teachers in my lifetime in our public school system? Will we see more community members partner with the school district? So could that something comes down from you, or how did that work?
Well, some of it can, and just to be clear, that's exactly right. You've got students who are gonna graduate from schools who never saw a teacher that looks like you.
Right.
They look like me.
Right.
Now, that's fine. I'm a
Yeah, you look good.
geography. Well, thanks. I had this experience. I started my teaching career out in Pine Ridge at Wolf Creek, and I had a Lakota elder ask me, he said, "Why are you teaching our fourth graders? You can't even speak our language. You can't."
Wow.
I said, "Fair enough." I said, "But I'm the only one implied." And he said, "Well, that's a problem." All of us thinking this together. So you're right. And the cultural competency piece, but what we can do is we can start through our Department of Education, start mandating as part of teacher training that we have that piece of it, that we understand and that we're culturally competent. We all know though that the real fix on this is to get students in front of them that look like them. And I'll tell you right now, very difficult. Who's gonna take the job when it costs them $50,000 a year? You're gonna see, especially
Oh, yes.
for the trauma that's been caused in black males. What are you gonna do during those months that you're student teaching and you don't get paid?
Right.
And for us to have a conversation in this, fair and equal are not the same things.
Right.
And we may have to put more resources to making sure that we're recruiting and retaining those teachers of color. So we put several $1 million into that piece of it this year. But the things we can do out of our office is ask for those things. But a lot of this is statutory changes to the curriculum to be culturally competent. The same thing happens, we see it with, Native American.
Absolutely.
50% of Americans do not know that Native Americans still exist today.
That's
I mean,
That's
in your
amazing.
community that might not surprise you, because
Right,
you're
right.
like, they don't know we still exist, we're still here. But yes, there's things that we can do. We need to be held accountable to this. And then going to that achievement gap, I said this about when we saw Justice Page bring up the idea of a constitutional amendment. I fully agree with the language of the idea that you should demand that your student, black, white, brown, indigenous, get that quality education. How are we gonna do that? What
Right.
I know is, unless I can get those kids in stable housing, that's a piece of it.
Absolutely.
Unless I can make sure they've got enough to eat, and unless I can make sure that when they go to school, they're in a place that's safe and comfortable for them, and somebody who's culturally competent to see them, and they're not expected, because we keep trying to ram them, a round peg into a square hole of saying,
Right.
read our stuff, this is our experience, this is what happened to you. Well, that's not my life experience. And then to deny, historical trauma in communities is.
And we haven't
big.
fully embraced that yet.
No, trauma-informed teaching is a new thing.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was teaching, that's not something we had. And I saw it, different things that happens to communities. Well, I never saw that in my experience, but that student did, and their learning is impacted by that. And to
Absolutely.
deny that, they're just not achieving, they must not be working hard enough. No, they're working twice as hard.
Well, absolutely.
But what was framed up for them is not culturally competent.
That's right.
So,
Yeah, so, Governor, I really appreciate just the keeping it 100. In terms of even incarceration rates for African Americans, I mean, it's like 10.5 times more than whites. And so how do we, are there drastic measures that we can actually do to bring this number down? I know you've mentioned a lot of really good programs, but it seems as if, there needs to be a big community response, and there's something that perhaps that your office could do.
yes, I think there are,
So-
and I can tell you this, is that I theoretically understood this, but practically understand it. One of the most important jobs, and probably the lasting legacy I'll have, is the appointment of judges. I just appointed 2 yesterday, did the interviews and things, and I can tell you, the questions that get asked in there are about inherent bias. The questions in there are about what are you going to do to address this? The thing is, and then, again, not just making sure that those judges are coming from together, that they are culturally competent, even if they're not. So I think looking historically down, and that's not gonna fix it overnight, but to make sure we're putting people on the bench that understand this, that address that, and start to move forward. We're starting to see, I think, a change in criminal justice around specialty courts to understand this. That usually comes around the treatment courts, veteran courts, or whatever. I think there's going to have to be that conversation about this, is that, again, when we're seeing that the rate is higher for a black youth in this state to end up in the Stillwater prison rather than at the University of Minnesota, that is a problem.
That's an issue.
And that is a fundamental, again, that's not luck or a statistical anomaly, that's a system that's set up to do that.
Right.
So I think in your cases, is looking across the board, we're trying to triage on the back end of making sure the recidivism rates are down and the post-release part is there, start front-loading the front end of things to make sure that they're not in that position. That's working with law enforcement who have been partners in this, and Commissioner Harrington, because, one of the things that we're not gonna, this is the keeping it real again, I'll tell you what's a tough conversation, is police shootings in communities of color.
absolutely.
And we all know this. It's traumatic for the police, it's certainly traumatic for the communities that are there. We're gonna have to understand what is triggering these situations and having that, and Attorney General Olson and Commissioner Harrington are out having those conversations in the community. So there are things that we can do. There's an expectation on this. Again, we are going to fundamentally as a state not be able to make it if we don't see where our future lies. And if we're spending more money on incarceration than we are on higher ed and services of that, you're losing. And we're getting close to that.
How do you, what you're saying, Governor, is right on point and bold with a lot of stuff we talk about on all our shows or in our communities. I'm amazed. I mean, I've heard you speak on these things. I'm even more amazed as we speak with you now. How does that work up in St. Paul? And this is no diss to those that are across the aisle or those that oppose you. But I know there are a lot of people, and not necessarily racist, but they just might be totally ignorant to, wow, what is he saying? How do you work with those folks?
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. I think it's some of the ignorance of this. I will be just candid with you. I have been expressing some frustrations around this issue, because even in Congress, and even seeing with the Trump administration, there was a fairly bipartisan belief that we needed to fix this. And some of them were starting. The example I give is Rand Paul. I feel like he maybe starts to get this. I do think though that I get a little frustrated because you're hearing this, and it's interesting to be in Rochester and all over the state where we have diversity in our communities, but there's a little bit of this trying to say, well, this is a problem in Minneapolis and St. Paul. If the families would just discipline these kids, it would be whatever. And they miss all of the historical issues, all the problems that happen there. And I think it's this desire to continue to try and educate and make the case. This is maybe for your listeners, or this is what being here, but what you heard WC say about don't kid yourself. If you're not involved, somebody's going to make a decision for you.
Absolutely.
I would encourage people to continue to make this case because the facts, the statistics, the morality around this are on the side of us correcting this historical injustice in a big, bold way. And I think we're on a tipping point on this, but the way the legislature is set up right now, I think a lot of people, because this is what I force people, and I tell my staff to quit saying this opportunity gap for children of color. That we know what that means in our school or whatever. I said, this is not just an opportunity gap for those children of color, it's an opportunity gap for the entire state of Minnesota. We all own this.
Absolutely.
If those children fail, we all own it. So I try and frame this and say, this is going to come home. If you think your rural community doesn't have this issue or it's not impacting
It's a public
them,
safety issue.
you're wrong. That's right. And in any state that, if it seemed, I mean, it just, the thought of, and I come back to this again, if our children, same age, walk into a public school, the discrepancies in discipline are already decided.
Right.
Even if your child is on the way to becoming a PhD, and mine is the knucklehead that he is. My son said this in 4th grade. He used to go down to the Y, and he's my son, so he's no angel, and he does some things, so I get that. But he told me when he's down there, and he talked about this in Mankato, he said when he was with his Somali friends, they got in trouble more, not because they were worse. That's what 4th graders said. And he wasn't making the connection it together, but what he was saying is that there's just something about this. And again, it's that inherent bias. It's that, and you saw a, 10-year-old start to understand that something was different there. And until we get to that part, and I think continuing to talk to people about this, to understand what that did. And, again, I don't know how enlightened he was in that moment, but at least he paused for a second and said, well, this is not right. That we get in less trouble for this or whatever, and you won't. That's daily life. What's being put in place? That goes back to are we educating people in cultural competency? Are we putting laws in place to make sure this doesn't happen? Are we thinking boldly to break this cycle? And again, I think in Minnesota, the thing I do worry about a little bit is I think there's been a keeping it real conversation about that we're failing in some of these areas, but I'm not certain that the fix keeping it real conversation has happened yet. And that's the part that you can kind of ease your conscience to say, boy, you're right, this is an issue. And as Lieutenant Governor always says, this is when Minnesotans say, would you like some pie?
That is it right there.
Have some pie and kind of, this is too uncomfortable for us to talk about.
That is so true.
I really appreciate you talking about these things, because these are the things that's been talked about and we've been feeling for a long time.
Absolutely.
And thanks for
And it doesn't get better, that's it. And I've said this about myself. To the certain degree that what an executive can do, one of the things is a platform to try and talk about this culturally. But I think now is the expectation, and I tell my team this all the time, is we need measurable results. We need to start seeing things happening. We need to
stop talking and make.
And again, it's not, and people are saying, nothing against you, but if you're not able to do that, you maybe move the conversation a little bit, but you haven't improved my kid's life. You haven't improved the community's life. And I think that's one that has to happen. And I know this, I keep stressing this, the last thing you need is you don't need me to do anything for you. You need me to do some things with you. And figure that out together. So I get, it's that partnership. I need these conversations. I need people, because this is what will maybe help those legislators, because I run into this all the time.
Absolutely.
If I'm for it, they're against it. If I said chili, they would, even if they like it, they would not pick chili. They would not pick chili because I like it.
And they're going to have a bad Super Bowl.
Yes, it's going to be a pharmaceutical. It's the way it works. So I think it's much harder when you see authentic leadership. Like you said, you can't be grassroots forever, but those morph into leadership that's changing the conversation. We need that.
I don't know, Governor, there might be a national campaign in you, sir.
Yeah, we got a couple more.
Yeah. Governor Walz, you had, when you were talking about schools earlier, you had brought up Justice Page. And I have a two-part question. What is your take on the proposed amendment to the education clause of the Minnesota Constitution? And then part two is, it does away with the DSEG rule. And what do you think will happen to it if we take the DSEG rule out?
Yeah, well, first of all, between Fed Chair Kashgari and of course Justice Page, I want to thank them for being part of this conversation and bringing it up. And I think what they're proposing is something that should be the air all of us breathe. The idea that every child would be able to get that. And I think they are focusing more on the individual than just systems wide. So for the first part, I welcome that conversation. I welcome it to get there. And I say this because we had an issue come up where a family was suing the school and suing the state out in St. Cloud over this issue of equity in education. And talking with Attorney General Ellison, so they were suing us. So I said, but I think they're right. You know, I mean, I agree with them, kind of, and it was the state. So I said, and this can happen in court cases. So I said, why don't we go to mediation? Because I think my fear was that when you talk about the desegregation rule, the one thing I worry about this is these are things that we being society, legislators, parents, everything else, need to fix. There's a time for the courts to adjudicate and oversee things, but I'm a little bit worried. So in this case, I said, so if we would have tried to defend ourselves against this case, and we'd have gone to court and won, we wouldn't have won. We still had a family who doesn't believe they were getting there. So if we go to this and we lose, what are the implications of that? Okay, so they order a desegregation, they order busing. Well, how do you desegregate housing? Because we've segregated that into where people can live. So you send them to another school, but you send them back home to neighborhoods where only a quarter of black families own homes as opposed to 75% of white families, own businesses, those types of things. So my take on this is a incredibly valuable conversation to happen. Is the right way to go down a constitutional amendment? It could be when they get all done. What I'm saying is, though, once that's passed, there's a lot of laws that were in place that were simply ignored and communities still suffered because of it. Right now, there's plenty of laws in place from, you know, Brown versus Board of Education on that this type of stuff shouldn't happen, and it still does. So if this moves us that, and again, if there are limitations empowering families to make a difference to improve the education of their children, we should give them that authority to be able to do that and that power to be able to do it. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. This isn't going to take one more child off the street. I got 21% of students in Minneapolis, St. Paul, who are housing insecure, either sleeping in a car, a shelter, or moving from couch to couch. Very difficult to learn. So I welcome the conversation. I think it, again, goes back to what I think a lot of people would like to have left rest on segregation and not have to have that uncomfortable conversation. I welcome that we have it again. I just think we need to think of what all the implications of doing this would do. And at the end of the day, is it truly getting to where you want to get, where we're reaching equity and inclusion, we're addressing historical inequities, and we're setting a path that when our two kids walk through the door, they're at the same spot. And recognizing that when you come through that door, resources might have to go in different directions. Fair and equal are not the same thing. This whole idea it's got to be exactly equal, got to be across there, whatever. We may have to put more resources into certain schools because that's what's needed. There's nothing wrong with that. And
we just talked with the superintendent about the whole.
And it's
I thought it was a social service model. He thought it a community school model.
Oh, that's where I'm heading right after this. And I made this the platform of my run for governor. These full service community schools put the power back into that. So I got a student, well, whatever decision you made in your life, but we got students that come to school. The one thing is they need to have a washing machine to wash their clothes so they're not self-conscious about that. Make that available. They don't have access to health care. You go in there with a toothache, good luck learning geography. So you get them in there, get that fixed. And those are things that, again, while it's predominantly going to be in some cases community of color, not all, that's every student. So I think the smart idea of aligning these resources, not seeing them coming in pieces, and actually getting to how do we address the whole child that's a piece of it.
Yeah.
And if it's gonna take legal changes to get there, I'm willing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So do you think that teachers, I mean, I've been a social worker, been licensed for like 17, 18 years, and I understand community school and wraparound services.
Yeah.
But part of that best practice is being cultural competent.
Yes.
So, and then I do a lot of training in trauma. So actually the kids are coming home, going to school, being re-traumatized
Yes,
by the school system.
yes,
Right, even though you do got community schools and wraparound
Yes.
services, but still the re-traumatization is happening because of the system.
yes,
Right?
yes.
And so it's gonna make them react and,
yes.
and act, and act up. And so that's why we really saying it's so important that on the front line, part of that community schools or wraparound services are having someone who looks like the kids.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree
Even
more.
though we have mental health practitioners and stuff there, it's stuff unique to us that's totally different.
Yeah.
That we can handle.
How do
be
we have
able to
that
do.
community to get there? How do I get folks to think about teaching, coaching football? at
It's a
these
tough one. We
schools?
talked with Chief Franklin about the idea of getting law enforcement officers, and there's a gap there. I don't know if the gap is the right word, but getting folks in
Because
services
I agree,
is tough.
it's
It's
back
tough.
to your point that nice shiny building with the clinic and the washing machines, doesn't do any good if what a child's seen or what they're going back to,
Yeah,
or.
but I think we could recruit. We keep saying we can't, but we can. I think we
Yeah.
can recruit. I think that the recruit had to be strategic about it and have someone of color lead the recruit. Right. Oftentimes we have.
Do you think
other
it's a
people-
resource issue? Do you think it does matter on this of making like student teaching so we're able to pay?
You have to pay them.
Get them
So
in?
you see how you see the
You get
model
it.
that you see the
Yeah,
model that you
keep it
did.
real. Bring out
The
that
model,
Yeah.
I propose this to the county too, so I shouldn't say too much. But the model they have in Chicago now is almost a model like Mayo has for their doctor
Yeah.
program, right?
Absolutely.
So after their second year, right, going into their junior year, they work alongside of a person, a seasoned teacher,
Yeah,
but they pay them,
yes.
right?
And the retention rate is so
Yes.
much greater.
Yes,
because of that.
right, so
Yeah.
they're building a pipeline, so it's
Yeah,
starting to work,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even predominantly African American, communities, it's still, you also have white teachers, so we don't know to talk about that, but you do.
Right.
It's not, they have problems too, so that's right now, they doing that particular, as a pilot program in Chicago, that's working, right.
Well, that's the type of thing, and I think putting that money into there to look at that and to develop that and listening to communities who are going to do it, because I agree, I don't think I know we won't get this right unless we're able to do that.
That's right.
That Worthington, again, 52% of the kids
Yes.
are community of color, 3% of the teachers.
52 and Worthington.
Yeah, Worthington.
Yes.
If I can just add a word to this, I mean, when we look at recruiting, some of the things that we do in Minnesota, I don't know if we're actually going to the best resources. I feel that we should have, when I was working for IBM and they wanted to do recruiting for engineers, they asked me if I would be a part of that program. I said, well, I don't know anything about engineering, I'm not an engineer, but they say, we want you to go to HBCUs so that they'll see a face that looks like them. Mayo Clinic in their medical school, they go to HBCUs to bring doctors here. So why can't we go to HBCUs
Yeah,
to bring
exactly.
teachers here?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly, we see, we see businesses and law firms have coordinators and folks in their HR department that are targeting to make sure that they have diversity, because what they recognize is their firm is gonna be better because of it. They're working just the same way, so those are absolutely ideas that we should be doing. And saying, this is a great place, my wife and I moved to Minnesota to teach, because it was a great place to teach. The salaries were higher than the surrounding states,
Yeah.
and it was a state that valued education.
Where are you from?
Nebraska originally.
Nebraska.
My wife's a Minnesotan.
Yeah.
Are you a Cornhusker fan?
I was, not anymore.
Okay, you're okay.
PJ won me over huge.
Okay.
It's good motivator too.
To that point, I want to give the superintendent some props. He was here at our last
Yeah,
show,
great.
and he did say, and I'm not sure if money's tied to it, but he's going down to Alabama. I'm not sure what
Yes,
university.
Alabama. He didn't say the university. But
To recruit teachers, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the
Okay.
program is like if they're
Okay.
paying them, but he's-
Districts are like this are able to, they have enough resources.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I
he's
mean-
starting to do that. I'm not sure what it entails.
Yeah, and I hope it works, because I know that in Rochester, when you look at our school district, discipline disparities are still really
Yes.
bad.
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
know there was an agreement with the state Human Rights Commission, and I still think,
Mhm.
just talking to community members, there's a lot of concern about that. So we need to fix this, because it affects our kids.
Right.
And you talked about your son and the Somali kid, and
Yes.
yeah, so that is still happening right now.
Mhm.
And it's not even a law enforcement issue. It's the police, they have a lot of work to do, and you have discipline disparities, and now you have law enforcement in schools. In some cases. So that's we need to really fix this, and so I'm looking to you, Governor. It's not only you; it's a whole community effort. But what are some of the tactical things that we can do?
That's right.
Because it doesn't really matter what Superintendent Munoz is doing as a father. I want to make sure that my kids are safe and they're treated fairly, and so we need.
What are the communities that you think are getting this right?
Well,
and we're looking at other states and some of how they're structuring and these types of suggestions about how
Oakland and Compton have a program as specific cultural competence, and they oversee the discipline and all that stuff right there. So they do have a system. I don't believe one of the things I think that we tend to study this in our community and other places. We tend to go to typically white individuals as the expert in their field. But we have African American schools do great achievement in this area that we never think about, right? And so Oakland does have one, and it's system wide in the school district now, right? Because Oakland, Compton now is changing. You have Spanish, you have everything like that, but they have almost like a watchdog. It's a part of their policies and everything. It's separate 501c3, but it's housed inside of the school districts and stuff.
Are they seeing results of it?
Yes, they're
moving the needle.
Yeah. So if you need me to get that for you, I can definitely send you all the information and stuff like that. But that definitely works.
And also, without going out of state, if we looked at the Fair School in Minneapolis a few years ago, they had great success, and they were doing things that were dealing with the culture of the kids that were there, looking at the family situations, knowing that kids are not going to be able to learn if they don't have meals and different things. So they had so many different programs that was very successful. But sometimes we'll take a program like that. It really needs to be a template that we can spread around. But it was kind of isolated to the Fair School because it was very successful.
They've got some, Washington Magnet, 90% students of color, 90% free and reduced lunch, 90% graduation rates.
Oh, that's what's
The
up.
kids are available.
That's what's
to do
up.
it. They're doing it. When you walk in that school in the morning, there's everybody grabs a meal when they go by. We're not even asking you. You're gonna have food in there, and it's not a cultural issue. It's not an economic difference of that. Everybody grabs their food and goes in, and they have the programs there. So I went in that school and watched their Chinese immersion. These kids can learn. They give them the opportunity.
Yeah, all kids can learn, absolutely. And if you take care of housing issues where they have a safe place to live, there's food to eat, and there's safety, and then that way we can actually
I think
get
that's the way
that's the framework.
This conversation is going to happen over at JM. Is our children's cabinet we are reestablished? This was established in the 90s. Governor Carlson did it in the beginning. That instead of saying, well, Minnesota Department of Education is dealing with this or whatever. No, we need to have housing in there. We need Department of Health. We need everybody together, and they need to be talking across the enterprise to get this right. So we're going to go down there, and then I think the thing is that we're going to go in those schools and ask those kids, what would make this experience better for you? What do you need? And actually hear them. I'm telling you, when we go ask them about vaping, the question that came out of vaping ended up turning into a conversation about unserved mental health issues that the students were saying. That's what was causing that. That was just a peripheral symptom of other things. And so I think we know that.
Let me ask you one other question is about, since you used to be a football coach. I know a video just went viral about Delonte West. I don't know if you know Delonte West. Who's to play in that, right? And I play college ball stuff, and I deal with mental health and trauma, right? And we often we do provide a lot of training for teachers, but all the time we forget that the coaches are teachers. And so now
More so in many cases.
in many cases, right? And so what I'm finding out is that the coaches, first every level, is not equipped to deal with ACEs and everything, to deal with that and everything. But we also know that sports also could be a healing mechanism for those who deal with mental health. But we don't talk about athletes and mental health. What is your take on that?
No, it's a great question. Well, it's a missed opportunity. I always felt that too, and I think people always would kind of dismiss you like, oh, you're the football coach or whatever. I did more life coaching. Then
Oh,
I
yeah.
did X's and O's. Football's not all that complicated, especially in high school. Like, go here, here's the gap, you can figure that out.
Yeah.
But it's how do you talk to them? And I saw this, especially with the levels down. You see it manifest itself when a coach is just doesn't understand learning or is not around kids. Then they're yelling at a little fourth grader.
Yeah, yeah.
Rest assured, every fourth grader wants to make a good play. They're not trying to embarrass you as a coach. That's why they did that. So they're yelling at the kid.
Yeah.
But it goes far beyond that when you start to see the cultural differences
Yes.
in this.
Yeah.
You know, can't you get in line? Can't you do this or whatever? And you're challenging a student on a cultural aspect of everything in their daily life, has them responding to that question differently, and they're responding absolutely appropriately, but it's not the one you want because you weren't trained on it. And I think we miss opportunities there. But I've seen it time and time again, the healing power of being part of those teams. You know, I think about it that it's a challenge for me as a football coach with a young man who played about the injuries and things, but I'm telling you, the opportunities of being involved in that, and I know people get tired of it in politics, the sports cliches. I'm telling you, those are meaningful life experiences.
They are.
Somebody-
You haven't played. Yes, I would.
Somebody was laughing at me about, you know, or made something, said, well, that's great, you won the state football championship, but this is important work or whatever. And I said, it was hard to win that state football championship to beat them in an election. So that wasn't what the issue was.
That's good.
But it was about how do you bring them together? And the one thing, you've all seen this,
Yeah.
that the sports environment is the place where the bonding happens. You see a lot of the stuff fall away because in a lot of cases, this is where students who aren't having success in the classroom are starting to feel that. And so it's not it isn't an old cliche that they do well in that, it transfers over to success in their classroom. So I think we need to do better. But your point is exactly right. I've dealt with it my whole life as a teacher, knowing my own inadequacies in this. We just don't spend enough time preparing people to be culturally competent and to use those methods. And then we don't heal using those. You know, I'm fighting this in the correction systems of not allowing Native American healers into there or whatever. If you're gonna get folks, you know, off drugs and use treatment, there are many studies that show those culturally competent ways of doing that and connecting people back to their culture.
It's huge. Yes.
So,
Yeah. All right, Governor, we need to get you out of here because you're a busy man. I hear. I don't know. I guess you're busy. One question, really briefly. We have many folks, at-risk folks, that can't see themselves as a Governor Walz, even a teacher. Some of the things. What couple of positive words would you say to them to encourage them in their journey?
Yeah, I would tell all of you, and just so you know, it's the people who show up. It's there's not some nefarious thing. I tell people it's more like the old Forrest Gump movie. Things just happen because of that.
Right.
What I would say on this is I never spent 1 minute until I was past 40 years old thinking about being in elected office. Like so many of you, I wasn't preparing my life to be governor, but my life was preparing me for that.
Wow, that's huge.
And the things that you're doing of teaching, of being in the military, of running a small business, and the idea that I'm not elected to expect that I have all the answers, but I am elected because one of the powers this office has is to convene the conversation, just what you're doing here, all the conversation.
That's right.
And then to use the power of statutory and the power of the office to both change cultural perceptions and to change the laws to fulfill what we think we all want to be. The idea that everybody is created equal and should have an opportunity to succeed. And when that happens, going back to your opening, we all do better and we all do better. It does none of us any good to keep another group of people down.
Right.
It does us no good to not have an honest conversation to say, you know what, we failed. And it shouldn't be like a big epiphany moment to say our system disenfranchised and put groups of people at a disadvantage to the advantage of others. And now it's time to correct that. That should not be a huge thing to say, but it has to happen.
Thank you. If you didn't get goosebumps on that, you need to call and wake up. Thank you, Governor. There you go, Barbershop Talk, Governor Walz. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.